Chapter 1. Elias's quiet lighthouse routine. At the far edge of the sea, where the horizon held stories of clouds and distant lands, stood a tall lighthouse with salt-worn stones and windows that blinked golden in the morning sun. Perched on a lone island, surrounded by waves that only whispered, lived the lighthouse keeper, Elias. Elias was a man in his twilight years, with silver-threaded hair that curled lightly beneath his cap, and eyes the precise shade of driftwood touched by time. His hands, though calloused from a lifetime of keeping the light steady, moved with the tenderness of someone who knew the rhythm of silence. 3 seconds each day for Elias began with the chime of gull song, though only one of those gulls had a name. Her name was Luna, a wise, speckled bird who had chosen Elias as her eternal perch. She wasn't much for idle chatter, but her keen eyes always followed Elias, and in the quiet that only the sea knows, she often understood him without words. The morning light entered through the round windows of the lighthouse in long, contented beams, falling on shelves lined with weathered books, polished stones, and little jars filled with curious things. There was no dust. Elias's slow, habitual meandering along the spiral staircase reminded the walls of his devotion. He moved like a melody written in a gentle key. No jarring notes, no hurried measures. His boots thumped softly on the old wooden steps as he descended from the lighthouse lantern room where he had extinguished the flame now that dawn had come. Each morning, the flame extinguished a little differently, like a sigh, or a bow, or an old lullaby coming to a close. Outside, the sea was soft and inviting. Mist curled in silver ribbons along the water's skin, and seabirds traced lazy arcs against a sky brushed in pale lavender. Elias's boots met grass that was sweet and soft, green with an edge of brine. His first task, always, was to greet the day. "Good morning, sky," he said, gazing up, "and good morning, sea. I see you both are, and handsome." Luna gave a low chuckle of a squawk and flapped once, perching on the fence post that looked out over the cove. The island was small, less than a mile tip to tail, but it was enough. Enough for Elias, who never needed more than the sound of waves, the play of moonlight across tide pools, and the company of a few quiet things. At precisely 7:30 each morning, Elias boiled water for his tea in an old kettle whose copper belly caught the firelight just right. He placed 2 biscuits on a small round plate, one for himself and one for Luna. Always oats and honey. She liked those best. While the kettle steamed into song, Elias stepped outside to check the sea glass traps he'd hung on posts along the coastal path. These were not for catching, not in the usual sense. Each trap was a wire-laced basket filled with bits of string, feathers, and glinty things meant to shimmer in the sun. Sailors, he believed, could sense the beauty from their boats and feel, if only for a moment, less alone. Sometimes he found things in return: a coin smoothed to near nothingness, a ribbon tangled in driftweed, once a brass button shaped like a star. Today, only a sprig of sea lavender tucked inside one of the baskets like a whispered thank you. Elias chuckled, plucked it carefully, and brought it inside, placing it in a vial on the windowsill. "You always know the sea's gifts," he said to Luna, who blinked back at him knowingly. Tea steeped, helping hands of steam rising from the worn blue mug, Elias sat at his writing table. It wasn't so he could write letters he expected anyone to read, but his composed letters were important to him all the same. He kept a journal in neat, looping script detailing what clouds clouds he'd seen, which tides had come, and how the waves sounded that morning. He began to write to an imaginary friend, his words falling out of the pen like a curtain of silk. His life was stitched with such rituals. At mid-morning, Elias would tend the lens of the lighthouse. No smudge could linger, and he polished it with both patience and purpose. The light, after all, was a promise to travelers on the sea that they did not journey unseen. He touched the brass housing with reverence, and the lens responded by gleaming in the warm sun. The hours drifted gently through the day. By noon, the birds encircled the island lazily, filling the air with occasional bursts of song. Elias read aloud to them sometimes, poetry by the likes of Keats or Shelley. Sometimes his own thoughts transformed themselves into quiet poems. Luna listened the way she always did, half listen, half dream. By late afternoon, the light pressed longer shadows from the little ridge where wild thyme grew. It was here, on this sun-slanted slope, that Elias would unroll a small picnic cloth for his lunch, a biscuit, a wedge of cheese, perhaps a boiled egg. He would lean back against a smooth stone and let the wind play with the cuffs of his shirt. It was a simple joy to listen to the grass whisper and to feel, for a while, small joys and contentment beside the great unfolding sea. He knew most would call his life lonely, but Elias had never thought of it that way. To him, the island pulsed with gentle life. It was in the gull's gliding shadow, in the sighing of the old shutters at twilight, and in the way the moonlight touched the paths he walked each evening. As dusk crept in, and crept it did like a cat across the sill, Elias prepared the lighthouse beacon once more. He wore a faded green coat for the task, as if he were donning a mantle. Duty had dignity, and lighting the beacon was not merely routine, it was a ceremony. He climbed the spiraling stairs again, the lantern room slowly aglow with rose and amber. Upon reaching the beacon, he paused, as he always did, and looked out across the entire compass of ocean. This moment, this hush, this perfect stillness that came just before light re-entered the sky, it held magic. Elias lit the flame. It caught like a heartbeat, slow and strong, then grew steadily, illuminating the curved glass and flowering outward in a great and gracious arc. The beacon's light swept out across the waves, brushing each crest with gold. Sailors far off, even if they could not see it, would feel it, this lantern of belonging. "This is for you," Elias murmured, "so that you may find your way." Once the light was secure and the night's rhythm had begun, Elias descended with care and calm, joining Luna at her perch near the hearth. She preened her feathers thoughtfully while Elias opened the window just a crack to let in the sound of the sea. Outside now, stars bloomed in black velvet and the ocean played its lullaby against the rocks. Before bedding down for the night, Elias stepped outside for one final round. The path he walked was cool and kissed with moonlight, and he walked slowly, savoring the way the air tasted, like salt and wind lilies. He paused at the far edge of the garden, a patch of grass speckled with rocks and shadow. Here, beneath the moon, nestled in the dreaming earth, waited seeds he'd discovered not long ago. Seeds unlike any others. Seeds that shimmered in the moonlight. He knelt and gently touched the soil as if greeting an old friend. The ground felt warm beneath his fingers, pulsing with something more ancient than time. "Ah," he whispered, "not yet, but soon." Nearby, Luna landed quiet as ever, and Elias smiled, for in this place of light and shadow and solitude, something new stirred, something soft and luminous. But for now he returned inside, the day folding neatly into memory. He lit a single candle by his bedside, took a sip of water and pulled the quilt over his legs. Above him, through a round window, the stars kept their watch with kind eyes, and the lighthouse beam, noble and true, turned slowly in its eternal circle, casting peace across a restless sea. Outside, where dreams sometimes took root in moonlight, one tiny sprout began to softly lift its head. Chapter 2. Discovery of the Magical Seeds. It began, as many profound things do, with silence. Not the kind of silence that follows a loud noise, but the deep and old kind, the type that blankets the earth when the moon is full and the world holds its breath, waiting for magic to happen. Elias was tending his twilight garden, the little patch on the far side of the island where he liked to sit and listen to the sea. Nothing special grew there, at least not yet, just grass, a few hardy windweeds, some wild thyme. But it felt sacred somehow, the soil warmer, the shadows deeper, the air thick with possibility. That evening the sky had settled into velvety dusk, the kind brushed with lavender clouds and softened by sea breeze. Luna, his feathered companion, flew lazy circles overhead, her calls growing distant as she hunted for supper. Elias had brought a small lantern with him, the kind that cast a warm amber glow only a few feet ahead. He liked the way it made the cup of the garden feel cradled and intimate, a pocket of gentleness in the grand swell of sea and sky. He was on his knees, clearing away a patch of knot grass, when his fingers struck something hard. Not rock, not quite. It didn't scrape like shell or root, more like glass, but not sharp, rounded, cool, smooth. Curious, Elias brushed the soil back carefully, revealing a cluster of small, iridescent pods nestled just beneath the earth. They shimmered faintly, even without moonlight, like dewdrops charged with dreams. There were 5 of them, each no bigger than a marble, each swirled with colors that seemed to shift the longer he looked at them. "Well now," Elias murmured, brushing the dirt gently from the most luminous of the seeds and cupping it in his palm. "You don't belong to any seed I've planted." Luna had returned, now perched silently on the fence post behind him. Her head tilted almost imperceptibly. "You see these, girl?" Elias asked, still crouching. "Either I've spent too long alone and the lantern's playing tricks, or we've found something special." Luna ruffled her feathers slowly, and something in the stillness made Elias hold his breath. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, as if on cue, the clouds shifted, revealing a brilliant stretch of moonlight. The silver rays poured down onto the garden, and something extraordinary happened. The seed in Elias's palm warmed, not hot, not uncomfortable, just enough to feel alive. It quivered, shimmering more brightly, and then, ever so faintly, it began to hum. The sound was impossibly gentle, like wind over harp strings. Elias could hardly tell if he heard or simply felt it. All around him the other seeds pulsed faintly in the soil beneath his knees, as if they too were awakening. He stood slowly, seed still cradled in his palm, moved less by fear than wonder. In his long life he had learned the difference between things that should not be and things that were rare enough to be trusted only with care. 1 second. Back inside the lighthouse, Elias brought the seed into the kitchen and placed it on a soft cloth near the hearth. It continued to hum faintly, its light dimming and brightening with a rhythm that felt like breathing. He found a small clay pot on the shelf, one he kept for sprouting herbs, and filled it with the the same warm, rich soil from his garden. Gently, reverently, he pressed the seed into the center and covered it with earth. There was no book to guide him, no guide for how to tend a thing that glowed and sang. But still, Elias knew what to do. Some knowledge comes not from reading, but from listening with the heart. He placed the pot on the windowsill where moonlight poured in. That night he didn't sleep. He sat beside the window, Luna keeping watch from the rocking chair, and listened to the soft rhythm of the seed's music as the hours passed. At precisely midnight, the soil stirred. From the top of the earth, a thin silver shoot appeared, curling upward like a whispered dream. From it unfurled a blossom, gently glowing pale blue, and its petals opened one by one. Each shimmered like frost-kissed silk under the moonbeam. The scent was faint but unforgettable, like wisteria and honey with a trace of sea air and something older, perhaps moonlight itself. Elias leaned forward. The flower, though it should not have lived, let alone bloomed, was undeniably at peace. And something within it whispered, not in words, but he felt it. This flower was meant to help, to heal, to gently carry burdens too heavy for waking minds to bear. And with that strange understanding came a memory. Long ago, in one of the old sailor tales his grandfather used to tell by firelight, there had been talk of dream blooms grown beneath the moon, flowers that appeared only in places where no violence had been done, where the heart was unhurried and time moved like honey. Elias, still watching the blossom sway, whispered aloud, so the stories were true. Sleep came to him like a soft wave soon after, a glowing tide that pulled him gently into dreaming, and when he woke, just before dawn, the flower had curled closed once more, its bloom tucked in rest like a sleeping child. That morning, he returned to the garden. The remaining seeds seemed more aware now, as if they'd heard the song of their sibling and stirred within the earth, waiting. He checked the patch again and again, fingers trembling with something close to reverence. At lunch, as he waited for the kettle to boil, Elias crafted small stakes of driftwood and carved little names for the new pots he'd begun. Moonblossom, Dreamroot, Whisper Petal, not scientific names, perhaps, but true ones, with meanings carried from the quiet parts of the heart. He began a new journal called the Dream Garden Journal, and wrote on its first page, "Tonight the first flower bloomed under a full moon. It sings. It doesn't use words, but I understand it. Its presence is kind, and its magic is peace. I believe these flowers are meant to grow here, on this quiet island of light. I will be their keeper." Days passed, then weeks. Elias nurtured the remaining seeds, planting each one beneath specific moon phases and speaking softly to them as he worked. They bloomed one by one, each unveiling its magic in silence, never in haste. Some glowed soft green and calmed the wind. One unfolded petals that sparkled with dew even at noon. Another released a drowsy scent that sent seabirds into gentle slumber. Mid-flight, gliding softly to ground as if cradled, the garden had changed. It shimmered now, still modest, still hidden behind the ridge, but alive in a way few ever see. One evening, a small boat appeared near the island's edge. A fishing vessel, limp with fatigue. Its captain, a woman named Marina, had been lost in fog for 2 days with a frightened crew and no rest to be found. Elias, who never turned sailors away, escorted them up with warm soup and steady words. That night, as the crew slept inside the lighthouse by the fire, Elias took Marina to the garden. The moon was full, the flowers sang. When she lay beneath the blooms and closed her eyes, sleep came, deep and kind. And for the first time in weeks, the lines across her brow faded. She dreamed of home and awoke smiling. As dawn colored the sea in gold, Marina whispered, wide-eyed, "What is this place?" And Elias, with a small smile, simply said, "A garden of dreams, planted by kindness, nurtured by the moon." The wind carried the scent of flowers across the waves, and far out at sea, other captains stirred in their hammocks and felt, if only faintly, a touch of peace. Back at the garden's edge, Luna circled once, then perched beside Elias. Together they watched the dream flowers flutter in the dawn air, each petal humming with the promise of gentle things. The seeds had been discovered, but the real journey of tending, blooming, and sharing was only just beginning. Chapter 3. Planting the First Blooms. At the heart of the island, just beyond the lighthouse path and shaded by a little hill where the wind often paused to rest, stretched an arc of soil that Elias had come to call home for his hands. It wasn't large or elaborate. There were no rows drawn in straight lines, no signs with proper labels or spacing guides, but there was intention and care. And now there were flowers, not ordinary ones, not daisies or tulips or any kind you'd press into pages or find sold in bunches. These were dream flowers, grown with moonlit soil and nourished by kindness. They had names whispered into being. They hummed when no one answered, and they bloomed when the world stood still. Elias's days had begun to shift, slow and lovely as the tide. In the early hours, just after extinguishing the lighthouse lantern, he'd take tea with Luna and then step outside to visit the soil. He had begun preparing for more. Each flower deserved its own place in the garden, not just marked with care, but with meaning. He didn't know how long the seeds would last, or if more would ever be found, but he knew what they asked of him: to be planted thoughtfully, to grow in peace, to offer rest. The first bloom had taught him that much. He had chosen a clear crescent moon night for the second. In his small curved hands, warm from the first light, Elias carried the next seed, cradled in a bowl made of driftwood and sea twine. This one shimmered green gold with flecks of deep blue like sea glass cradling a secret. He brought it to the garden. Everything was silent but alive, the sort of quiet that breathes. The stars above fluttered gently, blinking to some unseen rhythm. Luna circled, then landed on the fence post, still and watching. Elias knelt and brushed away the topsoil gently, fingers steady, movement slow. He dug a small hollow just big enough to allow air to kiss the sides and placed the seed in the earth. As soon as it touched soil, it pulsed gently. Once, twice, then settled. Elias whispered, "There, my friend, you have room to stretch now." He covered it carefully, patted the earth once, and looked to the moon. Then he lit the tiny stone lamp he'd made for each bloom, a flicker held in a seashell lantern, and placed it nearby like a vigil. The following night, it sprouted. The shoot, thin and curved, reached upward like a question before unfurling leaf by slender leaf, and by the third midnight the second bloom had fully opened. It was the color of early morning sky, speckled with soft white, and it swayed even though no wind stirred. Its petals gave off a subtle warmth, and when Elias touched one, he felt something curious, not heat, but comfort, as if childhood laughter stirred just beyond memory. This one, he knew, was meant for soothing hearts, the kind of hurt that no bandage fixed. He named it Star Leaf and added a marker shaped like a sail. For the next few weeks, the weather danced the way spring so often does. Warm winds by morning, rains that whispered in sheets by afternoon, golden gleams slipping past violet clouds in the evening. Elias worked steadily through it all. He rose early, brewed tea, fed Luna a biscuit, polished the lighthouse lens, and by mid-afternoon turned to the garden. Each seed came with its own story, though none spoke aloud. He simply felt them. He understood not in language, but in presence. The third seed shimmered violet when Elias held it to the moonlight. It pulsed like heartbeat rhythms, strong, calm, deliberate. He planted it sideways, beside the smooth rock where seabirds sometimes took rest, and when it bloomed, in the hush between sunset and nightfall, it unfurled a blossom the shape of a bell, heavy with soft pollen that glowed faintly in shadows. He inhaled gently. The scent made his shoulders fall, his chest loosen, and his eyes mist, not with sadness, but some cleansing kind of truth. A letting go. This one, he whispered, is for burdens too long carried. He named it Blue Veil and placed a pebble in front of its stem. It bore a tiny crack in the shape of a teardrop. The perfect symbol, he thought, of something broken made quietly beautiful. Not all the seeds bloomed so easily. The fourth remained still for many days, without pulse or glow. It was silver-gray, muted and cool to the touch. It refused the first planting location entirely. He could feel it. It sat in the earth and did not stir, not in rebellion but pause. So Elias, honoring that pause, lifted it gently and walked the island with Luna trailing overhead. He placed the seed in different spots, beside the tide pool, by the base of the old pine, near the southeast crescent of the cliffs. None felt right. The hush was too loud, the silence too empty. Then he found a ridge behind the lighthouse wall, half shaded by ivy and lined with moss, a place where stories settled instead of echoing, a private spot for quieter pain. He planted the seed again, and on the seventh night, snowfall came. It wasn't cold enough for worry, just light flakes brushing the stone in silver lace. Over the garden, the snow dusted each bloom, and in that snowfall, the fourth seed stirred. Its stem emerged midnight black with silvery edges and a curl of indigo at its tip. When it bloomed, it didn't bloom open but inward, a spiral of petals tucked into themselves, a bloom that seemed to hold sleep like a secret place. Elias named it Nightfold, and he knew it was for those who had forgotten how to sleep, not because they couldn't, but because rest felt like surrender. Another week passed. Elias's garden grew not upward, but inward. The plants didn't crowd, they whispered. They leaned gently toward one another without competing for space. He often caught Luna circling over them, not to guard, not to watch, but just to marvel. Visitors had begun to trickle in. Not many, but the occasional schooner-cut sailor who knew his lighthouse light. A slow-moving mailboat whose captain had heard a garden that sings. A mother and her daughter who came seeking calm after a storm too fierce for remembering. Elias never turned them away. He led them across the island by lantern, sat with them near the blooms, offered silence instead of answers. Some cried, most slept, all left lighter than they had come. Word, it seemed, moved like tide, quiet, enduring, unstoppable. Still, Elias said nothing about the flowers themselves. He didn't call them by name unless he was alone, because these flowers were personal, not rare like treasure or proud like prize blooms, not even even magical in the way fairy tales like to promise. Their magic was subtler. It lived in the slowing down, in the careful tending, in the gaze that lingered without needing to fix. The days glided by in soft rhythm. Each morning brought new patterns across the sea, each night a different kind of hush. Elias began to hum more as he moved, old songs, boatsmen's chants, and noticed the flowers would sway slightly when he did. He chalked it up to wishful thinking, but didn't stop humming. Then one morning, after a cold blush of spring rain, Elias emerged to check the blooms as usual and found something new, a sixth flower. He hadn't planted another, it had grown on its own. In the far left corner of the garden, just where the lamplight barely grazed at dusk, a small shoot had emerged. Delicate, pale gold, its petals had not yet opened, but even closed, it glowed faintly. He approached as if approaching a deer, slow and careful. Had one of the seeds divided? Had his care somehow been enough to make the garden grow beyond what he gave? He didn't ask aloud, didn't need to. This one, he sensed, was a gift from the garden itself, and perhaps, he thought, it was meant for him. He didn't name it, not yet. Instead, he built a small arch from driftwood around it, like a cradle, and waited. And over the next 7 nights, the bloom opened. It was unlike the others, not because of form, though it curled outward like a lantern lit from within, but because of what Elias felt standing near it. Forgiveness, not for others, not for things done or left undone in distant histories, but for himself. He sat cross-legged in front of that flower until the moon sank behind the mist, and for the first time in many decades, Elias let go of all the quiet regrets he had once folded neatly into the corners of his heart. He did not cry. He simply breathed, and the garden breathed with him. When he rose the next morning, the air felt different, lighter. The blooms had not changed. The sky was the same wide stretch of blue, and yet the rhythm of the island had deepened, rooted. The planting had begun something more than growth. It had welcomed healing. And as he walked back up the hill to the lighthouse, Luna soared overhead, circling once before gliding softly to perch beside the door. Elias looked out at the sea, hands tucked in his coat, and whispered, "They're ready now. The garden's awake, and I think I've grown a little myself." And the wind, tasting of salt and thyme, passed over the island in a sigh, light and full. Below, the dream garden shimmered quietly, cradled in the arms of earth and moonlight, with roots deeper than any map could show. Chapter 4: Encounters with Grateful Sailors. The lighthouse beam turned slowly in the night, sweeping its gaze across the open sea like a watchful eye set in stone. The island, bathed in starlight, slept in its gentle rhythm, waves brushing the shore with familiar whisperings, gulls nesting in the cliffs tucked under folded wings. Down the winding path from the tower, Elias stood quietly at the edge of the dream garden. It was almost midnight. The flowers breathed in moonlight like lungs made of silk and shimmer. Each petal, opening or at rest, held its small note of magic, a symphony of stillness, of unseen healing. Elias tilted his head as Luna landed on her usual perch. The old seagull said little, but tonight her quiet presence carried anticipation. The tide was rising, and with the tide came travelers. The first boat arrived just after moonrise, a weather-stained wooden dinghy, patched in places with strips of cloth, made its sluggish way through the channel. It had no flag, no lantern, just a soft glow from within and the sound of steady oars. When it nudged the dock, Elias was already there with a lantern in hand and warm tea waiting in a flask. A man climbed out. He looked barely 40, though his eyes wore a storm. His shoulders were hunched with exhaustion, clothes damp with sea air. He didn't speak at first. "Evening," Elias said gently, offering him the lantern. The man nodded once. "Heard of a light. Said it led to safer shores." "The light's not for rescue," Elias replied, "but it has helped many find their way." Another pause. Then the man asked, voice rough and quiet, "You have the flowers?" Elias only nodded. His name was Nico, a sailor from the northern strait who had lost his ship in a swell and survived on flotsam and luck. For nights after, he couldn't sleep, not for hunger, which he'd endured often, but for the memories that surged through his dreams. "I see it again," he said softly, sitting by the fire, the dream garden just outside the open door. The hull cracking, my hands slipping on the ropes, the sound of the sea swallowing a keel. Elias said nothing. There was no rush toward mending. He simply poured tea, handed over a blanket, then gently gestured toward the garden. Nico stood slowly as the warm night air lifted the scent of moon, blossom, and whisper petal toward him. The blooms looked ethereal under the stars, their movements subtle like sighs. He didn't ask what the flowers would do. He only stepped between them and breathed. An hour passed, then another. Nico sat by Blue Veil, his hand resting lightly on the soil near its roots. At one point he fell asleep, sitting up, head bowed, the air warm with the flowers' calming hum. When the moon was high, Elias left him there with a shawl and let the garden do what it did best, offer peace without expectation. Nico woke after dawn, face soft, the shadow in his brow less taut. Before departing, he turned to Elias and said, "I haven't slept a full night since the wreck. I dreamed of home, of my daughter on the shore, waving. It was like I could feel her arms again." Elias smiled gently. "She may not be far." The man nodded, looked again at the garden, and whispered, "Thank you for holding space when I couldn't hold myself." He was the first, but not the last. Word, as it always does, traveled like mist, slow, quiet, uncontainable. In the weeks that followed, more boats approached. Some stayed for only a night, like feathers drifting in and out of still water. Others stayed longer, like stones looking for a place to ground themselves. Each visitor brought a story, and each story found its rightful place in the garden. A woman named Bera arrived aboard a little cargo ship crewed entirely by women. Their voyage had been weeks long with storms at both ends. Bera, the helmswoman, carried the tension of every rope on her back, unwilling to relax, even while anchored. Elias noticed her fingers, always clenching, always scanning the horizon as if disaster were an echo waiting to be repeated. "We blocked it out," she told him one evening, "all the fear. But the quiet brought it back. Too many wave noises now sound like shipwrecks." That night, under a waning moon, Elias encouraged her to sit beside the flower nightfold. "Don't expect to feel anything," he said kindly. "Just sit, let your breath slow to its own shape." Bera resisted at first, but eventually knelt. The nightfold didn't sing, it simply sat with her. And for 3 hours, neither moved. When she rose, her hands no longer shook. She turned toward Elias and said, "It's like the nightfold held me still long enough for the fear to move through." After, she gifted Elias a compass from her belt, brass, well-worn, and etched with a storm cloud design. "To find your center," she quipped, He tucked it in among the flower plantings, a marker, perhaps, for the weary who needed even just one direction home. Then came Thomas and Wren, two deckhands from a distant sea barge who survived a fire at sea. They'd made it to shore, but since then couldn't speak about the flames, not even to each other. They arrived at sundown, quiet and unsure. Elias offered them the evening silent, but set two stools between the flowers, Starleaf and Blue Veil, where the garden hummed like a lullaby. They sat apart at first, but as the flowers opened to moonlight, their scents tracing lines through midnight air, the silence became less tense. After an hour, Wren spoke first. "I still see the orange inside my eyelids." Thomas nodded. "I hear the wood break." They didn't cry, but they held hands eventually, and when they awoke from a short nap under the blossoms, laughter, soft and cracked, escaped Wren's lips. "I dreamed of a mango grove near home. Haven't thought of it in years." Elias passed them both teacups and just smiled. For every visitor, Elias found a flower that matched. Each bloom not a cure, but a companion. Those with restless minds often sat with moon blossom, whose pulsing light reminded them to slow. Those with grief that lived in bone gravitated toward Blue Veil, whose scent stirred long-forgotten tears. Nightfold offered stillness. Starleaf granted moments of warmth. Whisper Petal opened memories wrapped in safety and light, and the unnamed golden bloom, resting gently behind the driftwood arch, rarely opened, but when it did, it was always at just the right time. One visitor, a young boy no older than 10, arrived with his father from a far-off island. The father had strict shoulders and silence in his eyes. The boy, called Miko, couldn't speak, not wouldn't, Elias guessed, but truly couldn't. No voice, for reasons unshared. Miko simply wandered the path until he found the golden flower. The moment he stepped into its light, it opened. Elias was still carrying his tray of tea when he turned the corner and paused. There was Miko, legs crossed, sunlight touching his face in soft dapples, and the flower hummed. Not a song, not even a sound exactly, but an energetic whisper. Miko smiled, eyes closing. Elias set the tea down and left them there. The next morning, Miko spoke. One word, safe. His father wept. Elias never tried to explain the flowers. He never gave instructions. The magic worked beyond knowing, beyond words. He simply maintained the rhythm. Tea at dawn, lantern lit at dusk, soil turned with soft hands, notes in his garden journal, organized not by date, but by bloom. When nights grew stormy, he sat near the garden, wrapped in his patchwork cloak, and watched the petals close tight, curling inward like infants in sleep. And when guests came, he guided them not with speeches, but with presence, a still lighthouse in human form. Eventually, even the sailors gave back. They left gifts, small ones, a carved whale's tooth, a bundle of dried lemongrass tied in string, a ring made from bone and shell. Some gifts Elias placed near the flower beds. Others he kept on the shelf beside his garden log. A reminder that peace, once shared, often circles back in gentle ways. One evening, as the tide whispered serenades, and the moon looked especially full, Luna perched on Elias's shoulder and let out a long, low note. He looked down the hill and saw a familiar sail. "Captain Marina," he murmured. He first to experience the dream garden had returned. She brought no wounds this time, only a smile and a box in her arms. Inside, 12 tiny paper packets, each sealed with wax and ocean-drawn symbols. "Seeds," she said, placing them into Elias's hands. "Not yours, but special. Sailors from distant waters wish to pass them here. Elias nodded, heart warmed. The dream spreads, she said softly. It always was meant to, Elias replied. That night they sat beneath the blooms, not to heal, not to ache, but simply to witness what the flowers had become. A dialogue rooted in soil, a garden that listened, a gift passed from silence to soul. And high above, the lighthouse turned slowly, like time itself, watching. The dream garden was no longer secret. It was steady, shared, and deeply alive. Chapter 5. Full Garden in Bloom. The lighthouse woke in the soft pink lull of dawn. Its beam, golden and true, made one last hush of a sweep across the sea before dimming against the sky's first glow, like a candle bowing to the sunrise. Elias stood high in the lantern room, hands resting gently on the sill. He watched the sea with quiet contentment, the way one gazes upon the face of a loved one still dreaming. Below, the island smiled with spring. You could feel it in the air, the way the wind had shifted. No longer brisk and briny, but soft, like cotton dipped in sunshine. Even the stone walls of the lighthouse, grey and weathered, wore a touch of warmth they hadn't known in months. Down the hill, the dream garden was in bloom, not a bloom here and there, not a scattering of petals, but full bloom. Every flower, from the sturdy moon blossoms to the delicate night folds, had opened together. Their colors layered like notes in a chord. Blue, softening gold, violet tempered by blush pink, leaves unfolding like pages of a letter written in light. The air moved with their scent, gentle and brave, not sugary, not sharp, just the right balance of memory and breath, of stillness and story. It was the kind of day Elias had thought about while planting the first seed, and now, there it was. He descended the spiral steps slowly, not because he was tired, but because this was a moment to be savored. Like the final page of a book you weren't quite ready to close. Luna flew ahead of him, her wings catching the new light. By the time they reached the garden, the petals were catching small droplets of morning dew, which sparkled like stars held close to earth. Elias stepped inside the archway. It had once been just a curve of mossy stone and wind-shaped driftwood. Now it was something more, a portal, not in the fantastical sense of flying to other lands, but something quieter, a passage from worry into wonder, a reminder that somewhere in the world things could grow simply because they were loved. He walked the curved path slowly, brushing fingertips against each bloom as he passed. They responded in kind, their stems swaying slightly in response. Whisper petal opened wider, as if in greeting. Starleaf brightened in hue, catching sun across its veins like stained glass. At the center of the garden stood the golden bloom, the one that had arrived unplanted. It had grown tall this spring, not towering, just proud enough to lean comfortably toward the light. Still unnamed, still mysterious, and perfect just as it was. Visitors still came, not every day, but steadily. Some asked nothing. They simply wandered the path, stood under the flowering arch, and breathed more deeply than they had in years. Others left notes tucked in the crooks of roots or pressed flower-shaped shells into the hedgerow as thanks. But recently, something had shifted, not in the flowers, but in Elias. He felt not weariness, not sorrow, but completion, a quiet, rooted sense that what was needed had already bloomed, that what was given had found its way, and now it was time to rest. One morning, after he had served tea and brushed the dew from a nearby bench, Luna landed beside him. She tucked her wings and settled deep into the crook of his elbow. It was rare for her to rest so long beside him, but today she stayed. Elias looked out over the garden, the sea shimmering behind it. He exhaled not with sadness, but peace. That evening brought the final visitor. She arrived near twilight in a ship painted pearl grey, her sails weathered and creased by countless crossings. When she stepped onto the dock, Elias recognized the curve of her shoulders and the strength in her gait. It was Captain Marina, but this time she brought no burden. She came with open hands and seedlings, wrapped in cloth and soil with symbols painted on each satchel. These were dream seeds, passed from sailor to sailor, each carrying stories of comfort found in moonlight and petals. Without a word, she handed him the last one. It shimmered pale lavender, edged with gold that pulsed like a heartbeat. It bloomed once, she said. On rough water, we all slept through the storm. Elias nodded. Carefully, he cradled it in both palms. You'll plant it? She asked. He considered the seed, felt its hum, and then he smiled. I will, he said softly, but not here. That night, after the moon had risen and the stars resumed their watchful gleam, Elias walked to the edge of the island with Luna close behind. The sea was kind, the horizon clear. He carried a small bundle across his back. Inside were notes, sketches of flower patterns he'd documented, pressed petals placed between soft burlap, and a map, his map, full of dot trails and symbols of where each flower had opened. And beside that, the seed, the one Marina had entrusted to him. He stood at the rocky edge for a very long time, listening to the sea, to the garden behind him, and to his own breath, content and steady. Then he whispered, "It's time to share the bloom." 2 days later, a new lantern was lit in a new place, on an equally quiet island in the southern channel. There, another garden would grow. Another keeper, perhaps with sea blue eyes and a voice trained in lullabies, would tend it, and the dream flowers would bloom once more, in new soil. Elias did not need to be there, because peace, once planted, needs no keeper to last. Back at the lighthouse, everything remained. The lens still turned, the lantern still rose, and the garden, oh, the garden lived on, even when no feet pressed its path, even when rain fell and no hands caught the dew. It bloomed quietly, season by season, holding its place in time. Some nights a passing ship still paused, bathing itself in the golden sweep of the light, and aboard that ship someone might breathe just a little deeper. They would never know why, but perhaps in the folds of their dreams that night they would see flower petals flickering with soft magic, and feel, if only for a moment, completely at peace. As for Elias, some say he left the island in the arms of moonlight, following Luna into the clouds. Others say he remains, a quiet gardener tending a dream not of this world, but beside it. But those who know the truth speak little. They simply smile and watch the sea. And when they feel lost, they watch for the lighthouse beam, the one that sweeps not just across waves, but across hearts, a beam that once lit the path to a garden where healing bloomed under moonlight, a garden where peace was planted, not with grandeur, but with love, quiet, steady, eternal, just like Elias.